This video is made possible thanks to InVideo AI. More details coming up soon. The US economy has achieved an incredible level of growth since the end of the pandemic. However, Uncle Sam's achievements have been so great that they have eclipsed those of the other great North American power, Canada. The Canadian economy has always been characterized as a well-oiled engine. Its GDP has grown at much higher rates than most countries in the G7. Not content with this, Canada was also one of the first countries to recover from the 2020 crisis. Who do we have to thank for this unexpected triumph? And were the policies of Justin Trudeau's government the key to overcoming the crisis? Well, probably not. The truth is that long before the Progressives came to power, Canada had a reputation as an economy untouchable by economic downturns abroad. An example of this occurred in 2008, where their GDP suffered much smaller declines than those of their counterparts in the G7. Regardless of whether the right or left governs, the Canadian economy seems to be going like a rocket, improving year after year, and does not seem particularly affected by the problems of other nations. Nevertheless, if our visual economic team is making a video on this topic, it's because things have started to go awry. What's more, if you were to talk to a Canadian right now and tell him or her that Canada is one of the most prosperous in the world, they would probably laugh in your face. The reason? Well, wealth per person has been stagnant for several years. Its GDP per capita has had one of the most disappointing performances of almost any developed country over the last decade, even lagging behind other troubled nations such as the United Kingdom. Even worse, during 2023, last year, real GDP per capita collapsed by almost 2% relative to 2022. In other words, a full-blown recession. So the questions are clear. Why is the Canadian economy in decline? What has changed? But first, after years of making YouTube videos, I've seen just how much goes on behind the scenes. Recently, we found a game-changing tool, InVideo AI, with its latest version, InVideo AI V3, coming soon. InVideo AI V3 brings advanced generative features, enabling you to create entire videos from just a text prompt. From engaging stories and educational content to stunning visuals, it gives you endless creative possibilities. It's like having the power of a director in your hands. For example, you can simply ask it to create a video on the 10 most incredible wonders of India and their history.
From the snow-capped Himalayas to the sun-drenched beaches, India is a land of extraordinary contrasts.
But that's just the beginning. InVideo AI V3's generative capabilities can bring any idea to life, whether it's dramatic stories, product ads, educational content, and more. Unlike other tools, InVideo AI V3 will be available to everyone in just a few weeks. With unique features like voice cloning to narrate videos in your own voice, it sets a new standard for video creation. And here's the best part. By using the link in the description, pinned comment, or by scanning the QR code, you can try InVideo AI V2 for free and create up to 4 videos with a watermark. To unlock the full potential, it's just $20 a month. Use our exclusive code VisualEconomic50 to double your video creation credits in the first month. First, if we are to understand Canada's current situation, it's essential to look at how its economy has grown in relation to its population. For almost a century now, Canada has become one of the most welcoming places for immigrants on the planet, opening its doors to more than 250,000 people in 2014 alone. To give you an idea of the sheer insanity of this number, according to World Bank data, more than 1 in 5 people living in Canada in 2015 were born in another country. But before pointing to immigrants as the cause of all the ills of the Canadian nation, let's keep in mind that there are other countries where this is not the case. Cases like Singapore or Hong Kong show that an economy can welcome thousands of people every year without harming income. And this is exactly where the problem lies. The Canadian economy has not grown as much as it should have. If we look at the data, most of the GDP growth in recent years has been due to the increase in workers, that is, the arrival of immigrants. Meanwhile, productivity improvements have virtually disappeared. In other words, the Canadian economy has not been able to take full advantage of its potential, or at least not as much as other countries have done. The question is why? To understand why, we must first ask ourselves when the problem started. Because until 1980, Canadian productivity levels were almost on a par with those of the United States. However, it was from then on that things went downhill. What happened, starting in the 1980s, to cause Canadian productivity to plummet? Well, let's take it one step at a time. A productive economy requires large amounts of investment, the acquisition of machines, computers, network infrastructure. In other words, elements that allow us to produce more and earn more money. Economists call this process capital accumulation, and it's one of the main reasons why modern societies have been able to raise their living standards so dramatically over the past 200 years. The question is, how is the current investment situation in Canada? Well, the news speaks for itself.
Ottawa's disinterest in entrepreneurship and business investment hurting economy.
The Canadian economy lacks entrepreneurs who are willing to put their savings on the line in order to grow their businesses. Among developed economies, Canada stands out as having one of the smallest and most timid business sectors of all, with private investment at less than 50%. And do you know the worst part? It's no longer just that local companies are not willing to invest, it's that foreign investment is heading the same way.
Jack Mintz. Canada has lost $225 billion in foreign investment since 2016.
Since 2000, foreign capital inflows have plummeted from more than 9% of GDP to less than 3%. This decline in investment, both domestic and foreign, is one of the key factors behind Canada's decline. But how could this happen in Canada, one of the world's largest economies? And why are investors, including those from the neighboring United States, no longer interested in the North? The answer, unfortunately, is a classic: overregulation. State interventionism is nothing new. To put it nicely, regulations are like a blanket of snow. In small amounts, it's lovely, but when there is a lot, it becomes annoying. And if there's too much, it even becomes dangerous. And in the snowy land of Canada, regulations have become just that: dangerous. Canada is by far one of the countries most closed to foreign investment in the world. Its level of restrictiveness is so great that it's almost 3 times the average of the entire OECD, and easily surpasses even the United States, Japan, and France put together. Paperwork, approvals, licenses, fees, permits, taxes on everything you can imagine. The bureaucratic and fiscal framework is so asphyxiating that it has managed to destroy incentives for investment. But do you want an example? Take the dairy and poultry supply management in Canada. This system limits the amount of products farmers can produce through quota control, which keeps prices high and prevents free trade. And then there are many more regulations like this one. The result? According to a paper by the International Monetary Fund, bureaucratic barriers to internal trade between provinces alone cost as much as a 20% barrier to imports for each province. In other words, the Canadian state is so vast and so bureaucratic that its own territories act as a market more closed than the European Union. But there's more. It's no longer just that investment is low, it's that the investment that does exist is not directed at exploiting the best opportunities available. On the one hand, Canada is one of the lowest spenders on research and development in the G7, surpassing only Italy, which is not the most prosperous economy in the world either. On the other hand, the Canadian economy has undergone an unprecedented process of deindustrialization since the early 2000s. Its manufacturing sector, which is one of the highest value-added parts of any economy, has come to represent less than 10% of GDP, whereas it accounted for 17% 20 years ago. At the end of the day, if you had a company and the state came and took most of your profits, didn't let you invest, and on top of that, put absurd regulations for everything you did, would you take risks in some ultra-competitive market like technology? Or would you prefer to stay in sectors with less potential but more security? Well, high-value sectors are not thriving. Hardly anyone in Canada wants to risk their money to go into artificial intelligence or industry. So much so that the country's share of high-tech exports has deteriorated sharply since the 2008 crisis, a time when government regulations and investment restrictions began to become increasingly pervasive. Now, what if I told you that not all the blame for this decline lies with the Canadian government? In Canada, there's another major problem that has prevented it from competing and adapting: the talent drain. Being neighbors of the United States, Canadians have access to one of the most competitive labor markets in the world. And of course, high salaries in Canada pale in comparison to their US counterparts, especially for high-level professions such as surgeons or engineers. To give you an idea, last year, according to Canadian census data, only 10,415 Americans arrived in Canada, but 126,340 Canadians moved south of the border. And obviously, all these people are not going to the US just for pleasure. They are going for work. Better salaries, promotion possibilities, and even lower taxes make the possibility of migrating south a desirable career prospect. The outcome? Canadian companies are being left with the crumbs, and the best professionals, trained right in Canada, are leaving the country. Ultimately, Canada's business sector has been eroded over the past few decades by massive amounts of government interventionism, regulation, and taxation that have left the country's productivity levels in the doldrums. If Canada wants to get out of the crisis and grow by more than just its GDP, then it will have to improve this bottleneck situation in its capital accumulation cycle. But until it does that, it's time to hear your thoughts. Do you think Canadian productivity will be able to break out of its downward trend? And are you confident that the government will be able to find solutions to the problems? Don't forget to leave us your answers below in the comment box. And also don't forget to give us a like if you like this video. And if you want to support our channel, you can subscribe and follow us on social media. Take care, and I'll see you in a future video.